say something a little too quickly. As I said earlier, like people who speak English, as a first language, ask me to repeat myself because I get excited and I talk too quickly sometimes. So yeah, no worries, man, no pressure. So, why don't we start kind of at the beginning? How did your love of sword and sorcery come about? Was it when you were like a little kid, or did it come later?
Yes, when I was a little kid. That question has a rather long answer. I think my earliest childhood memories go back to movies like Willow, The Beastmaster, Cruel, John Boorman's Calibur, of course, and the masterpiece John Milus' Conan the Barbarian.
Mm.
That was the A stuff. After that came all the Italian exploitation flicks that came after those. The Barbarians, Conquest by Lucio Fulci. Also, these are older, but I also enjoyed the old Sword and Sandal movies, the Hercules, Maciste with Steve Reeves, Rec Park. Those also were Italian movies. It wasn't sword and sorcery per se, but it had mythology, monsters, warriors, and you can imagine all those images of strong warriors wielding swords or axes against monsters, skeletons, witches, plus half-naked women, it all witchcraft, demons, all of that fired my imagination to unsuspected levels. As a teenager, I came across the original sources of all that, like Howard novels, Robert Howard Conan novels, and Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champion saga,
Mm.
Elric, Gollum, Hogmoon. I know you are publishing Michael Moorcock story also.
Yeah, we got
Right?
very lucky there. Yeah, we're gonna have a new story by him.
He's a master. He's a master.
Mm.
And Fitzlaver, Farther the Grey Mouser, of course, Lord of the Rings. I went to original sources, and also the comics because we had Savage Sword of Conan, the Conan the Barbarian magazine with Roy Thomas, John Buscema, Barry Windsor Smith.
Yeah, Ernie
Well,
Chan. I really like his art
Ernie
from
Chan
Savage. Yeah.
also. Ernie Chan. Uh, it was awesome. All my brain. My brain was a breeding ground for all that information, and well, it had to come out some way.
Well, speaking of getting it to come out, what's your relationship with creative writing? Do you write yourself, or do you focus mainly on being an editor?
I I write myself. I've been writing also since a young age. Actually, I wanted to be. See, I always read novels, stories, comic books, but when I was a kid, my first love were comic books, and I wanted to be an um, an all-round artist. Like Frank Miller, a guy who writes his stories and draw his own comic books. But well, I learned that the best thing I could do for the art was stop drawing and focus on writing. So I started, but this was when I was a kid. But I started writing professionally since 2015 when I got my first stories published in and not in Argentina, but in a Spanish publisher. It was a sword and sorcery story in an anthology by the Spanish publisher Pulptur. It was an anthology called Conjura, where where they published tales. They selected some tales to publish an anthology. That was my first professional work. Since then, I have been writing story for publishers in Spain, mostly in Spain,
Okay.
because there is a small niche in Spain for what we call neopulp or modern stories in the style of old pulp fiction. Like uh, uh, police stories, sword and sorcery, horror. That started about in 2010, starting in those times, and it's still on. and well, I started an editor, in fact, with the other two editors from Quinta Raza, Pablo Ramirez and Guillermo Moreno, because they are also writers. In fact, we have worked together in some projects, and between those projects, it came the idea to launch a magazine about heroic fantasy, but heroic fantasy from different cultures. Not the sword and sorcery based only on German, Saxon, Norse mythology, the one we usually see in movies or in novels, but looking for alternate mythology, alternative sword and sorcery stories. Like the first issue of Quinta Raza is about pre-Columbian myths. I mean, the Aztec, Mayans, the original tribes from from Central and South America. They have a very rich mythology. They have their own legends, their own heroes, their own monsters, their own magic. We call it. It's a complicated word because it's in ancient Mexico. We call it Macahuitl and Nahuatl, which means sword and sorcery, because the Macahuitl was the weapon wielded by the ancient Mayan warriors. It was like a wooden club with obsidian edges.
Yeah, little serrated teeth. Yeah.
Yes, like in the movie Apocalypto, Mel Gibson's Apocalypto, they wielded those weapons. It was similar to a knight's sword, for example. Well, the Aztec and Mayan warrior were the Macahuitl. And Nahuatl means sorcery. And Nahual, in the Mexican tradition, is a sorcerer. So Macahuitl and Nahuatl, it could be ancient Mexico for sword and sorcery.
I love it. You kind of touched upon it a little there, but could you maybe tell us more about your decision to become a sword and sorcery editor? Earlier today, I was speaking with Matthew Gomez of Broadswords and Blasters. I asked him sort of, why did you become an editor? And I think it feels like sort of like what you started to say there. It tends to be writers sitting around going, well, here's how I do it. Was that kind of what happened with you?
Well, as I said, we start editing together with my friends and colleagues, Pablo Ramirez from Mexico and Guillermo Moreno from Venezuela. We decided to publish. We were among many projects. All of them focused especially in Macahuitl and Nahuatl, as I told you. So in telling stories, writing and publishing stories about sword and sorcery based on pre-Columbian myths, based on Aztec, on Mayan, or on South American native mythology. And it came the idea, we can do this with pre-Columbian mythology. We could also try this with, I don't know, Japanese mythology, samurai fantasy, wuxia, Chinese mythology, Chinese heroic tales, peplum, sword and sandal adventures in the ancient times with Roman, Greeks, ancient gods, Sumeria, Babylonia. And well, we thought it was a good idea, so we start with issue 1 about pre-Columbian mythology, and now, if I remember well, we have 5 numbers out there, which covering pre-Columbian mythology, number 1, samurai chambara or samurai fantasy, number 2, sword and soul African fantasy, peplum, sword and sandal in number 3, sword and soul or African fantasy in number 4, and wuxia or China's heroic tales in number 5, and I have forgotten. The sixth one is about Arabian Nights. I mean, Arabian mythology, like Sinbad the Sailor, Aladdin,
Yeah.
Alibaba and the 4,000 Thieves. All that mythology came from 1,001 Nights. The Arabian Nights.
I know what you're saying. Yeah, yeah. No,
Mm.
there's so much potential, and it sounds like you guys are really working hard to
Yes.
tap into all of that. I first became aware of you when our translator Gonzalo was like, "Hey, have you seen this magazine? They got, I think it was issue 4. I could be wrong, sorry. Which had a lot of features about Sword and Soul, because
From
he knew I
Soul,
was.
issue 4. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. He knew I was interested, and he was like, "I know you can't read Spanish, but check it out." And it looked beautiful. I mean, I think you guys have a very good layout. I think the art and everything. It looks really masterfully put together. Do you do the layout and design, or is it one of the other
No,
editors?
no. There
Or
is the staff is composed by Pablo Ramirez. Pablo Ramirez, who is the chief editor. Then the editorial staff is composed by Guillermo Moreno, who is from Venezuela, right from Venezuela, and the layout, all the design, which I agree it looks fantastic, come from Araceli Rodriguez, who works also with us, and yes, she is who works in the layout, the cover, the interior design, and she does an amazing job. I couldn't agree more with you.
if you feel like me, I'm very lucky. I have a guy named Nathan who does our layout, and I feel so lucky to have him because there's nothing wrong with a very simple single column zine DIY, amateur aesthetic. I enjoy that too, but it is a pleasure to have someone with real skill there on your team
Of
to
course,
make it look beautiful.
you need a professional.
Yeah.
Somebody skilled who knows her job, knows what she's doing, and Araceli is great.
Mhm.
I get surprised every time Paulo sends us the cover, the first draft. We are all amazed.
So I'm curious, could you please tell us a little bit about the Quinta Raza? Oh, no, wait, pardon me. I'm getting ahead of my own questions. I'm messing up. What I wanted to ask you before I started that question was, well, Google Translate tells me, tell me if it's wrong. Google Translate tells me Quinta Raza means fifth race. Assuming that's correct, could you please tell us the significance of that name and how it was
Yes,
chosen?
it's correct. It's correct.
Okay.
Quinta Raza means fifth race. This is because it comes from an essay by a Mexican philosopher. Um, it's an essay called La Raza Cósmica, the Cosmic Race, by the Mexican philosopher and academic José Vasconcelos Calderón, where he mentions a fifth race that is it's the result of miscegenation, something that we associate with a magazine that covers different variants of heroic fantasy. And well,
Ah, okay.
it also sounded cool for us, but mainly because that essay.
Cool. All right. So yeah. So I like that. I like that a lot. So okay. So what I was leaping ahead to earlier, I was going to say, could you please tell us a little bit about the Quintaraza editorial process? How the three of you work together and work with the authors on their stories. How you guys do open submissions, and then where does it go from there? How do you do that?
Yes, when first we decide the topic. We decide the topic of the upcoming issue. Normally, I live in Argentina. Pablo lives in Mexico. Uh, Guillermo lives in Venezuela. Araceli also lives in Mexico. So we are in touch through internet, through the social networks, and we start a brainstorm, suggesting ideas, what we can do next issue. When the topic comes out, we open a call for stories on that certain topic. For example, through our Facebook page, um, yes, I think we have a Twitter. I must be honest with you. I'm not the I'm not an expert in social network. I do what I can, but
Yeah.
well, we open a call for stories of a certain topic. For example, we, Quinta Raza will publish stories about Sword and Soul. We fix some parameters, length, topic, but aside from that, we'd like to give freedom. Oh, yeah, obviously, we want to give freedom to the writers. So we start receiving the stories by our email account. We read every story, we discuss, and we make a we make a selection process, and if necessary, some corrections before being published on the magazine. Sometimes, aside from the open call, sometimes we contact authors we already know and offer. Hey, you want to write a story for the next issue? Yes, and well, it's simple. It's we discuss, we decide the topic, we open a call, we receive stories, we read them, we select, we correct if necessary, and we publish the next issue with all the work that is behind Araceli's layout, which is fantastic. The reading takes some time, and we also have our daytime shops, so we have to juggle with the time. But it's a pleasure for me and for my colleagues. It's a real pleasure.
I'm curious because I have a little dictatorship where I am. It's just me as the editor. But what happens with the three of you when maybe you have a story that, one or two of you thinks is ready, it's good, but one or two of you thinks it isn't? How do you resolve those discussions?
It it haven't happened, but if it does, we are a democracy. So majority wins.
Yeah, I guess with three, actually, you can just vote. When I was talking to Matthew earlier, he does it with one other person. So I thought, well, two people, you could get deadlocked, right?
That's difficult. That's more
But
difficult.
you're right. Three, you could just vote. So hey, I guess that's pretty straightforward. um, okay, so here's the hard question that every magazine faces: how does Quinta Raza support itself financially?
Well, actually, the answer is quite simple.
Oh, okay.
It doesn't. The magazine is digital and free. Uh, we are a bit, let's call it romantic, idealistic. I know, but this is a project we face with the intention of just showing the different types of heroic fantasy from different cultures, from different yes, from different cultures. So far, it's a non-profit project. Our intention is to spread multicultural fantasy and make its authors known, who are many, are very, and some of them are very good. At least for now, it's a non-profit project. We all have our daytime shops, as I told you earlier, sorry, and we juggle with with our times, but it's a work of love, let's say.
Nothing wrong with that. There's quite a few other magazines that run the same way, like Whetstone Magazine. Who through their Discord, I've found out so many other good people and learned about Quinta Raza. So here we are, right? It doesn't have to be for money. I am curious, talking about getting the word out. How do you guys approach promoting the magazine and making people aware it's out there?
Well, we do it through our social networks, mainly Facebook or Twitter. I'm aware that we have to diversify further, but so far we use social network, and well, sometimes we do some of the stuff, well, like me right now, but some of the stuff appears in a as a guest in a YouTube channel or in a podcast. It all helps.
Are there any particular online communities that you connect with? Because like for example, me and a lot of other guys I know who edit or just write, just Sword and Sorcery, are always kind of tilting to try and get into, or posted on, I should say, Reddit r/fantasy with its 3 million people and its mods who are very particular about what gets to actually stay on there after you post it. And it always feels like there's this hunt for finding the places online that are worth your time promoting, that you can even get promoted in, or the ones that it's nice to be shared in, but there's like 5 guys, and then I think about how with me, I'm trapped in a prison of only speaking English. If I spoke more languages, I wonder what other communities there might be that I don't even know exist. Are there any um, online Spanish language communities that you are particularly fond of for
Yes,
promoting your magazine?
yes. I move mainly. I'm a bit oldie, and I move mainly to Facebook. And in Facebook, there are certain groups that, uh, for example, there is. Earlier, I was talking about the Neopulp.
Yeah.
There are two groups I know, maybe much more, but I know two groups: Proyecto Pulp and Ficción Pulp, Project Pulp and Pulp Fiction,
Mm,
that are about, well, about sword and sorcery, hard-boiled, western, horror, space opera, and there are big communities. They have many members. In Proyecto Pulp, there are probably 2,000 members. For us, it's a big number. And we promote our work, not only the magazine, because we have a novel, or some of us publishes a tale in an anthology or some of that. We we share it through those communities. It helps.
Okay. And I guess we're already touching on this a little bit, but I'm kind of curious about, maybe other publications or publishers. If you could tell us a little bit about the overall Spanish language sword and sorcery scene. And I'm also wondering, I've heard, I can't confirm, but I've heard there's also a Portuguese language sword and sorcery scene. And I wonder if there's any overlap or connection or, yeah, I'm just curious what you could tell us about all that.
About the Portuguese sword and sorcery scene, really, I don't know. I'm in Brazil. In Brazil, I speak Portuguese, and I think in Brazil there is a big sword and sorcery fans community. Conan is huge in Brazil. They
Hmm.
love Conan. I mean, it's about that. But I don't speak Portuguese. Luckily, I speak a little English, so I couldn't tell. But in Spanish, we have, for example, in Argentina, we had a world-renowned author, Liliana Bodoc, author of La Saga de los Confines, which is, when she was a great writer. She sadly passed away a few years ago, and she wrote a trilogy about South American mythology. It was like, you know, the, the American conquest by the Spanish, but told in a, it wasn't, it was
A different
told
perspective
it's
or?
yes, from a different perspective, and it wasn't the historical facts. It was a fantasy story with a similar setting. There was another continent, which was some kind of Europe, that came to another continent where live tribes, starts a war. There are evil forces, there are the good ones, but it wasn't. I can't find the word. Sorry.
A secondary fantasy world or an alternate
Yes, it
history?
was. Yes, but it wasn't good and evil. The Europeans are bad. The natives are good. No, it was
Yeah.
much more complex. There were great characters. Actually, it was a great trilogy. I enjoyed it a lot when I was younger. And well, the writer sadly passed away a few years ago. She was young, still young, but unluckily she couldn't write.
It's a
more.
shame. Was her work ever translated?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. I don't know. Then, well, in Spain, there is, I think, nowadays there is another saga called La Espada de Fuego, the, the the Sword of Fire, written by Javier Negrete, which it has 5 parts, and it's sword and sorcery mixed with some sci-fi themes. Very good. I also read it. I also enjoyed it. And well, then we have people like Jesus Montalvo, who is going to be published with you. I
I think there's a
yeah,
publisher someone was telling me about. Their name, it's almost spelled like Pandemonium, but it's a little
Pandemonium,
different.
yes, Pandemonium. Pandemonium launched an anthology last year called Chronicas of Avia. I sorry,
Huh, that's
um,
okay. Take your time.
Chronicas of Avia Shala, the Avia Shala Chronicles. That it was there were sword and sorcery stories. Again, like I told you earlier, sword and sorcery stories based on pre-Columbian myths. I have a story published in that
Right. Yeah.
anthology.
Yeah.
See, it's called Los Sembradores de Cadáveres, the Sowers of Corpses. And the editor of that anthology, I know him. We are in touch to the social network. So it's from Uruguay. He's called Victor Gripoli. He's also editor from Solaris magazine, from, sorry, so no, it's not a magazine, for Solaris, which is a publisher from Uruguay,
Uh,
which is specialized in horror, science fiction, and fantasy.
Cool. I'm wondering, I don't know how much you've thought about it. Maybe I think there's a tendency for English-speaking countries and their people to think we're the center of the universe. So I apologize if I'm doing that. But I wonder, how much you maybe have thought about the potential. Like, I'm wondering what possibilities you might see yourself in trying to further connect the Spanish and English-speaking sword and sorcery communities. I think about how many people in America speak both Spanish and English, and I feel like maybe there's something possibility there, and also, as I say, in translating more Spanish language works into English and vice versa. What do you have any thoughts on that? Or
Well, I think there are many more Spanish speakers who also speak English. Maybe awfully like myself, but we also speak English. And when I say we, I mean the people from Quinta Raza. We think that an approach with heroic fantasy and sword and sorcery as a link would be very beneficial, very good for both. We already saw it with, for example, Andrei Sapkowski, how an Eastern European author was able to reach millions of readers and somehow renew the genre in many aspects. I think it's a great opportunity to take advantage of this so-called global village, the connectivity throughout the world, to share stories, myths, cultures. Like in ancient times when the bards went from village to village, sharing stories with other bards who told them in other realms. This would be more or less the same, but here in the information age.
I love it, man. What a great answer. Thank you. Okay, so I mean, those were sort of all my big questions, but there was the odd thing that was suggested to me by Gonzalo Baez, our translator, that we could maybe dig into a little bit because I think we have a little more time. Um,
Sure.
yeah, I guess he suggested to me. He asked, "Are you familiar with?" Apparently, I don't know this, but he said apparently the first ever Conan comic book was published in Mexico, and it was an adaptation of
Yes.
Queen of the Black Coast. Is that true?
Yes. Yes. It was a kids magazine called Cuentos del Abuelito, the Grandpa's Tales. It was a kids magazine, and they adapted. Of course, it was absolutely illegal. There were no 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 intellectual property rights. it was absolute. It was obviously pre-internet. So what happened in Mexico, in US, nobody in USA knew what happened in Mexico. So they came with this magazine. It was I don't have it, but I have.
Have you ever seen a copy or scans online?
Yes, I have seen some scans online, some pages online. It was strange. I think the main character in this story was Belit, and Conan in this story is some kind of blonde Viking type guy who is there with her. And I would love to have a copy of that because it seems a lot of fun. But I
It would
have
be really cool to get, to get a copy and do some very high quality scans and republish it. I'm sure the rights would be a nightmare, but
yes,
I maybe not. I think about how I'm no expert in this, but something else I hear about is that there are Conan stories being published in Europe, and they just
yes,
have to be careful not to say Conan. They call it him the
yes.
Cimmerian, right?
Yes, I was about to tell you that. In fact, in Europe, it's free. It's free. You can write stories with Conan, with Solomon Kane,
Oh,
with Cole, but you can put the name in the title, like the Cimmerian, or I think there's a comic uh, that's about to come out about Solomon Kane called The Puritan,
of
for
course.
example. And I have to name them because they are my friends and they are going to kill me if I don't name them.
Please.
When I was talking about sword and sorcery in Spanish, I told you about Liliana Bodoc, about Javier Negrete. These are maybe their more known um, sword and sorcery authors. But there is, for example, Andres de Sanchez. Andres de Sanchez is incredible. He writes about a character called Scarrion Gunther, and it's based in the Norse mythology. And their stories, it has his style reminds me to Joe Abercrombie, grimdark violence.
Okay.
He's very good. I love his stories. There's also Miguel Ángel Jarro. Miguel Ángel Jarro has a character called Hundara the Rebel, who is a female Celt warrior who fights against the Romans in in the ancient times, like Robert Howard's Black McMorn.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Only this is a hot red-haired woman fighting against the Romans. There is also Luis Guillermo del Corral. Luis Guillermo del Corral has a character called Vindius the Cantabrian, who is a warrior. Also, yes, the Cantabria is a region of Spain that in ancient times was conquest by the Romans. And this Venus the Cantabrian is a Cantabrian warrior who also fights against the Romans. The Romans were the big baddies of the ancient times, it seems.
Yeah, well, I mean, they work pretty well in that role. Oh, this sounds awesome, man. Thank you so much for sharing all these names with us. Maybe we'll have to hunt some down online and put them in the comments or the description of this video afterward, so it's easier for people to find them. I guess maybe there's one last thing I would ask. Well, I always think of something else, but let me think. Sorry. Yeah, I think I'm wondering how much sort of South American, Central American literature has influenced the sword and sorcery in your magazine or other Spanish language sword and sorcery that you've seen. Like maybe magical realism with Garcia Marquez or Borges's stories. Do you find that ever kind of leaks into it or?
Well, let's see. Magic magic realism, like Garcia Marquez, or the fantasy tales by Jorge Luis Borges. To me, they are great. I mean, they are giants in literature. But it's to me, it's a different thing. I mean, if I have an influence from South American authors, it comes not necessarily from literature, but from comic books.
Hmm.
we have one example is Alvar Mayor by Carlos Trillo and Enrique Breccia. It's an Argentine comic about a Spanish in the America during the conquest. It isn't sword and sorcery per se, but it has a warrior because the guy is an Spanish conqueror, not a conqueror. It's more like a grifter, a Spanish grifter who has a sword, obviously. But there are stories who touch the supernatural ground. You know, like the curse from a native witch or a legend about a creature which lurks in the jungle. Now that you called magic realism, it has that touch of magic realism because there is no magic or spectacular magic. There are myths, legends which mix with the historic events. We have this vagabond which comes from which walks the which walks America when it was during the conquest. You know, the tribes, the conquerors, the war. It's a very interesting comic book, and I have one more. When I was a kid, there was a publisher in Argentina called Editorial Columba. Columba was to me like, you know, the old pulp magazines during the early 20s and 30s in USA.
Yeah,
It
Weird
was
Tales and
similar.
so on. Yeah.
Yes, it was similar. Only this was a comic book. It wasn't prose, it was comic books. But you have in the same comic book war stories, Western stories, mm, horror, science fiction, and in that magazine there were some sword and sorcery stories that were very good. We have one called Orgrund, which was about a blonde barbarian who came from the north, a story that later mixed with Atlantean myths, mythology, and also with a little of sci-fi. Well, my favorite of all time. I'm sure in USA it's not known, but in Argentina, in South America, and in Europe, it's quite known. Is a comic book called Nippur de Lagash, or Nippur from Lagash. It's a Sumerian warrior who lost his city. He's betrayed. He turns into a vagabond. He walks the ancient roads. He makes his friend with Prince Teseo from Athens. In fact, he helps Teseo to slay the Minotaur. It was like this character created by this character who moves in that ancient world of legends, of myths. It wasn't historically
Accurate, maybe, but
yes,
that's
yes.
okay.
It also wasn't. It also wasn't the. It also wasn't the Hercules of China show. It was more balanced, but there wasn't historical accuracy. But it was a lot of fun. It was very well written. His creator was a writer from Paraguay who passed away some years ago, called Robin Wood. He had an Irish name, but he was from Paraguay, and the artist was an Argentine who also passed away many years ago, called Lucho Olivera, and I love that comic book.
Sounds very cool. I can see why you would. All right. Well, this is our first ever live stream, so let's see if we can handle the technical side of this. But I have faith in Kevin. Thank you, Kevin. Our sentient logo in the corner there. Does anybody in the comments? I see some people chatting, which is great to see. Does anyone have a question? Gonzalo, I see you are in there, and I see Norbert and Matt Sully's in there. I think. Any questions before we wrap up? We'll give people a chance to type them. I guess that's the one thing about not doing this as a radio show, right? There's no call-ins. Let me just go up the chat here, see if I've missed anything. Oh, yeah, okay. All right. Oh, I see. Okay, and you've been actually answering some people's stuff in the chat. You're a better multitasker than I am. Okay. Well, it doesn't look like we. Oh. All right. Cool. Kevin really digs Enrique Alicante's work. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like we're good for questions then, and we've been having a nice chat for a good 45 minutes now. So I think that's an interview. I think that qualifies. Well, honestly, Jorge, again, it's just been really informative and interesting, and I'm very happy we managed to connect, over time zones and stuff here. It wasn't too bad, 2 hours difference, and yeah, I really hope the Kickstarter succeeds for a lot of reasons, but one of them is I would love for Jesus' story to be only the first that we translate and put in our magazine. I really wanted to see what we can do to connect all these different scenes we're talking about here. So yeah, before we go, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Just to thank you very much for inviting me over, guys. Despite my English, I enjoyed it a lot, and well, I would love to do it again, me or Paulo or another from the team. Or well, the idea is to share this passion we have for sword and sorcery, for heroic fantasy, and like I said before, the distance, they are not so big anymore.
No. I mean, it has many problems, but the internet can do some cool stuff sometimes. And yeah,
Yes.
maybe next time we do this, let's get all three in here. That'd be really fun. Yeah, all right. Well, it looks like everybody in the chat had a good time, and they're all appreciating you, and certainly I am as well. Thanks so much, Jorge. All right, Kevin, how do we get out of this? The leave studio button, I guess. Jorge, I'll email you later with the details of things.
Well,
thanks again, man. And thank you to everybody who's been watching and listening and seeing this again later in the recording that we'll share everywhere. Bye.